I read Create Amazing, Turning Your Employees into Owners for Explosive Growth by Greg Graves. This is the first time that I've read this book. I'm kind of reading it for work. The book is a professional development book that's aimed at executive level owners and CEOs, people like that, of businesses from small to mid-sized. Although I'm sure he would like everyone to try and do this, encouraging them to become fully owned ESOP corporations. So ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plans. I work at a 100% ESOP company, and so that's the reason that I'm reading this book. The book is not really aimed at people like me who are in the working class and already work at an ESOP. It's aimed at, like I said, executive level people who don't have a business that is an ESOP, but are thinking about doing it. And so the whole book operates as a kind of sales pitch for the reasons why to do this. An important and interesting element to the book, I think, is a perspective that includes not only the productivity and efficiency of the employees and therefore the wider company itself, but also a kind of community or patriotic duty that folds the prosperity of corporations into the prosperity of America at large. And so there's an argument in the book that is essentially political but nonpartisan that ESOPs would make America a better place to work and live and would kind of stabilize and perhaps exponentially grow the economy at large as well, and kind of create a paradigm shift in the way that regular workers view their current employers. So there's a lot of distrust from workers towards management in America, and there's a widening disparity in pay. And Graves argues that ESOPs would be a way in retirement to close the gap and include non-management workers in the benefits of successful, business institutions. So like if the corporations in America at large are successful, then the workers of those corporations would share in the success long term and have a more financially sound retirement for their future. And it would also slow down or maybe even eliminate the movement of jobs out of the country and overseas where there is cheaper labor, because the efficiency and kind of ownership mentality of employees would make them so valuable that they would be impossible to replace from anywhere else, is kind of Graves' larger sales pitch. But his entire view is well informed by being the longtime employee over 30 years of a company called Burns and McDonnell, that is kind of a Midwestern company that does engineering work and has been a 100% employee-owned ESOP for like 20 or 30 years, for a long time. And he was the CEO of that corporation at the time that he retired from work. And then he wrote this book around the time of the pandemic. Structurally, I don't think that this book fits in very well with other professional development type books that I've read, in terms of it doesn't have a structure that allows you to jump from part to part. It doesn't offer kind of a worksheet mentality or strong summarization at the end of chapters that kind of like review all of the main points. He tends to, at the beginning of a chapter, lay out various, goals of that chapter, sometimes even bullet points or numbered points of things that will happen. But at the end, it's kind of like it feels more like a memo. It feels very personal. Like there's a lot of his personality comes through in the book, which is a unique thing about this compared to other professional development books that I've read. It feels like a very personal project. He's very passionate about the 100% employee owned ESOPs. And so he's, trying to make this sales pitch. I guess he speaks the language of CEOs to other CEOs. There's all kinds of things that kind of early in the book, especially grate against me, and that he doesn't know his history quite as well as he thinks he does, and doesn't understand things like socialism and communism and the deep capitalist theory and things like this. But I guess, I've spent most of my life reading lots of books, and he probably hasn't. He's spent most of his life becoming a successful CEO and successfully running a business. And so I don't doubt that he knows what he's talking about in those terms, but when he leverages very often, like Jefferson, the writer of the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson, the core ideas of, and values of the American dream and how those relate to the economy. And I think he's sincere in everything that he says. And he disavows socialism, and all of that stuff probably would make him very attractive to the audience that he's trying to speak to. And so it's probably the right move, but I don't think that he actually understands that the values of an ESOP are closely aligned with actual socialism and Marxism in ways that I think he would be surprised if he actually sat down and read Das Kapital by Marx or something like that, because actual communism, Marxist communism, is just super capitalism. That's all it is. It's Marx loves capitalism, thinks that it's great, and that the main problem is that the workers aren't treated well. They're not given any skin in the game, and that it would work even better if they were employee owners. And so it's just funny that he doesn't understand that at all, but also kind of annoying to me personally. But it's, again, who cares what I think, because this book is not aimed at me at all. And so it's probably right that he gets it wrong, because his audience also did not waste their time learning things about history and philosophy. Instead, they went out into the world and had big careers and made money and hired and fired people. The good old American dream capitalism. He points out several examples from his own company, and there's a lot about the Burns and McDonnell Company throughout the book that have to do with its history and his time there, and he gets into specific names and stuff like that. And that was a little bit difficult to follow. I'm sure that reading this book, if you were a longtime employee or if you worked at this place ever, that it would feel neat and cool to read this book that kind of memorializes the success and influence of the company. It's, considered a really good place to work. And he picks out examples from the history of the company and his time there that illustrate the ways that ESOPs can improve the lives of all of the workers and induce the company into maximizing, core American values like melting pot diversity, fairness for all, equity, and things like that. And so he talks about, the unfair pay imbalance between men and women, and how that was corrected after the 100% employment ESOP program was instituted, about merit-based pay programs and how they motivate employees to, try really hard each year to meet the goals to maximize the financial rewards that they'll receive that year, kind of like the way that a waiter at a restaurant who relies on tips will work harder to make those tips, and so on and so forth. And he talks about, the inequalities of race and gender and sexuality, and how all of those things are mitigated because the company when it's 100% employee owned, is always looking for the best performing people and not to create a hedged in monoculture that exploits people in order to benefit, the executive class kind of becoming a monoculture that everybody looks and sounds the same. And then they just exploit the employees that are below them to try and maximize their own retirement funds. Since everybody's retirement fund is the same retirement fund, it realigns the company's values to find the best people no matter who they are. And this itself kind of aligns with American values at large and makes all of the employees not only work harder for a better, retirement for themselves and their coworkers, but also makes them proud to work in that place and, take pride in what they are creating together. And I can say just from my personal experience of working at an ESOP for nearly a decade now, that there's really something to that it feels different to work at an ESOP on a essential core level in terms of how you see yourself, how you see your other employee owners, and like the mindset that all of us carry into our daily tasks. Even if you're a person who's fairly low on the hierarchy of authority, the way that I am as a manual laborer, I still have a lot of sense that I have agency to execute my responsibilities and improve the place, and that I'm participating in creating something much, much larger that improves not only my community, but all the communities that our business touches. And so that changes my relationship with the institution, where I don't feel as exploited as you usually would having a job. And instead, I feel like I'm contributing to a good future for lots of other people who are in a position like I am, where I don't have that college degree, I don't have that office job, I don't have the big salary that I can take a large chunk of and invest it in a retirement fund. Instead, the retirement fund is provided to me in the form of stock in the company and is a much more valuable resource than anything that I would be able to cultivate if I wasn't a part of the ESOP on my own. Even if I was working somewhere else doing manual labor that paid more per hour, I would never be able to afford the kind of investment that I have access to thanks to the ESOP program. And that's a thing that he talks about quite a bit in the book as well. The benefits to all levels of employees and how it can fundamentally change your sense of the future and your anxiety level, and you're not so worried about how are things going to shake out for me in 15 years. Instead, you're really focused on how can I make things even better for myself, my business, and my community, because you're not looking to the future with anxiety. And that helps to make the business even more productive and create an even larger, successful safety net for the future for everyone. And so I basically, I'm already drinking the Kool-Aid. I believe in everything that the guy is saying. He's it would be better for all the businesses to be employee owned. It would, it would just be fairer for everyone, and it would be more productive. And I don't disagree with any of that stuff. So it doesn't, again, the book is just not aimed at me. So I'm not sure how effective the argument would be to an actual CEO or a sole ownership situation that's looking to diversify the succession and how that operates in the future. And they want to divest and give back to their employees who made them successful and become 100% ESOP. This would be, a book that would be valuable for them to think through that. And he walks through the ways that that is possible, other resources that would be helpful to look at. But he gets into the nitty gritty about here's the kind of tax structures that are available. Here's how you should arrange your board of directors, and on like that. And so he has a lot of knowledge about the kind of C-suite level nuts and bolts that go into effectively managing an ESOP, and then the kind of relationships that you want to cultivate with, from the executive level down to the worker management system as well, in terms of cultivating a vision of like, what kind of people do we want to have work here? What should their mindset be? And, how should they be looking at the future in order to fit in with the culture of an ESOP? And so it's pretty detailed in the back half of the book. And I think it gets more kind of enumerated and broken down and a little bit easier to digest than the first half of the book, which is more personal and it's more invested in the particular history of the business that he worked at, and like names a lot of names of different people. And it is a little bit confusing and hard to follow sometimes as someone who didn't work there. He doesn't get into the exact specifics of legally you need to do this or that. Instead, he recommends hiring advisors and keeping those advisors kind of at arm's length in the consultant role so that they're not a part of the company and don't confuse the priorities of, the particular business with their responsibilities of, keeping everything above board so that everything is legally in place, vis-a-vis the IRS and other legal requirements under the American system of how ESOPs operate. He gives a glimpse into the history and beginnings of ESOPs, the kind of economic theories behind them, and the way that those theories have played out over the last, 30 years or so. And, makes a pitch about the future and how they could evolve and change the paradigm of American workers and the economic system of America at large, kind of like I said at the beginning. And so the entire project feels like very personal, to me, in terms of like it feels like a personal project of Greg Graves himself, that he's very passionate about. It includes things that he's very proud of personally, and that he is sharing a piece of himself and a part of like his career is very important to his identity. And so he's giving that part of his identity to kind of back to the larger American business community in a very sincere, honest way that is a plea to them that like, here's my experience with this and here's all the ways that it improved my business and my life. Please learn from this and like, maximize your happiness as well in the ways that I did. I'm not sure that it's a great example of like business communication or an especially like convincing argument in its own terms for what it's advocating for. I guess a different audience would be necessary to evaluate that claim. But my suspicion is that like if somebody's interested in doing an ESOP, like maybe this would help them along the way that they're already interested in. But I don't know that you could like use this as a cold sell to someone who is, in the mindset of I should be at the top of an apex of profit consumption, that, like the business exists in order to flow profit money to me for my early retirement as quickly as possible. And then you try to convince them that an ESOP would be even better. I don't think that this would play with them, but that's just my personal opinion. I think it's a little bit top heavy in the beginning with the personal history, with the particular business history, in a way that doesn't allow the benefits of what he is proposing to be obviously clear. Like I would have expected more of a sales pitch kind of approach where here are all of the benefits that will be elucidated through the book. And then here are all the parts that you can just jump right to this part to learn how to integrate this element of ESOP culture into your business and, blah, 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 blah. Kind of like make the book more modular, I guess, is what I expected when I picked it up. And instead, it's a pretty linear experience that relies on a wide base of appeals to his own career, the success of his business, and the larger kind of appeal to authority of, American culture and American history and the interplay between those elements, and then builds upon that with academic research, a larger history of like economic survey of American businesses, and then a kind of projected kind of top of the pyramid, if you will, guess about the wider benefits of, a larger deployment of ESOPs in the future, and a kind of demand from the working class of, millennials and Gen Z at large going forward to have a more meaningful relationship with their employers and a more kind of plugged in, culturally diverse workplace that is also integrated with a political project that feels sincere, meaningful, and just. And so, like, I think that you have to read the book in order in to go kind of on that journey up the pyramid, if you will. And that's just not the typical structure of kind of business development that I expect to see from, business development books, I guess. So I'm just not sure if it would appeal to the kind of people who typically buy these books. But overall, I think it was well written. I understood everything that he was saying in it. I wasn't totally convinced by all of his arguments, but again, I'm not the person it's aimed at. So maybe that's good.